as a religion. He terms the term religion as madhab. Madhab, as you know, in traditional Islamic school of law. But Parwez sees the entire religious outlook as a madhab. Rather, he sees Islam as a deen, which he himself defines as a complete socio-economic system. And this is evident from his work, Islam, A Challenge to Religion. Because if Islam itself is a religion, then how can it challenge religion? Well, he doesn't see Islam as a religion, you see. He sees Islam as a deen. And he believes that there is simply no word in the English language which corresponds to the word deen. So he just sees complete socio-economic system. Introduction to Rububiyyah. Rububiyyah is not a very common word in Islamic discourse. I mean, I know the Salafis use it, Tawheed, Rububiyyah, but it comes from this word Rabb, which means Lord. You know, we recite Fatiha, which says Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Praise be to Allah, Lord of the worlds. And Lord actually means nourisher and sustainer, or one who takes his ward, or the one who he is guardian over, from one point to another point in evolution. Parenting in the Quran is said to be Rabb, to give tarbiyah, to be a parent or something. So you can tell what your parents do. Your parents protect you, your parents nourish you, your parents guide you, etc. Allah is the Rabb. So the word Rububiyyah, which is the title of this book originally in Urdu, comes from the word Rabb. So Rububiyyah is therefore the system of nourishment and development set by Allah. And if you think about it, all social-political systems aim to do this. Whether capitalism, Marxism, even serfdom back in the day, it all has that goal in mind. It nourishes and sustains. The only thing is, its goals are not concordant with reality, as it were, whereas the Quran claims that it is. So this system, this Rububiyyah system, is brought to life through our actions. So it's not something which you can just mull over and it happens. No, we have to act upon it, fulfill the contract with Allah, and Allah will realize this system in our lives. A key component to this Rububiyyah system is the nafs, or the self. What is the self? I mean, if you think about the self, it is something usually very abstract. You know, obviously you can't physically touch the self. So it's something which is largely conceptual. It is basically the human personality. So if your personality is developed, you have a highly developed self, then you will have a particular effect in your life. And this is what it means. The self separates human beings. Oh, sorry about that. I meant to say it separates human beings from the animal kingdom. And the development of the self will lead to fulfillment. So the self really is the starting point of the Islamic project. So you can't bring about this Rububiyyah system unless you are developing yourself. So what Parwez is trying to do is, he is trying to marry these two concepts in order for us to understand the socio-economic system of the Quran. And he contrasts this system with the materialist conception. What does he mean by this? Well, basically, he's talking about the capitalist system. He had a very great problem with the capitalist system, if you read this book. And he says that the materialist outlook is generally every man for himself. Because, as you know, the point of a business is to make profit. It does not actually have any kind of caveat in making that profit. So therefore, the materialist outlook stops there. Every man for himself. And the results speak for themselves. We see it in our society today. We live in a very uncaring society. A society which, you know, people can be shopping at Harrods only to come out and see a homeless person on the street. There's something, if you think about it, there's something really wrong with that. yet this is the product of that materialist conception. So that is extreme materialism. Now next we see the other extreme, which Parwez also takes an issue with, which is the mystical conception. Now, the mystical conception believes in the Platonist philosophy. Plato was an idealist. He thought that they were ideal forms, and that somehow removed him from reality, according to Parwez. The mystics believe that this world is essentially a corrupt place. So you don't want to have really too much to do with the world. You're trying your best to minimize your participation in worldly affairs. And Parwez claims that all religions, except Islam in his understanding, adopts this view. He believes that religion is essentially the means for us to remove ourselves from the realities of the world. I think if you read Marx, you somehow can find a somewhat similar statement.
Sorry, could you just say that again? I didn't quite understand this slide.
Yeah, Parwez believes that all religions, except his understanding of Islam, will take you away from the real world. It will bring you to the mystical conception, where you are divorced from reality. So, what's that? You okay with that?
Okay, and how does the first two lines fit into that?
Well, because the world to them, according to him, is a corrupt place. According to them, is a corrupt place. So they don't want to have anything to do with it. They use religion as a means to get away from it. In Parwez's
He believes in the Platonic.
No, he doesn't. He's giving you the false conception. Now we come to his conception, which is the Quranic conception. So Parwez rejects spiritualism and monasticism according to his interpretation of Quran 57:24. He also says he also believes that some elements of the world are temptations, but this doesn't mean that you need to get away from the world. Rather, human destiny is to achieve greatness. And he used the story of Bani Israel, the children of Israel, and their emancipation from Egypt as an example for this. He believes that human society as a whole aims to a heavenly existence. And he sees the story of Adam as a model for utopia. Now, traditionally, the story of Adam is about falling from some kind of a heavenly garden into the world type thing. But he sees it in metaphorical terms. He sees Adam not as a prophet, but as the human personality, the human archetype, as it were. And Adam was initially in a situation where humankind were free from fear and grief. But unfortunately, he lost that. And Parwez saw post-life heaven, as in the afterlife, as an earthly heaven. So in the Quran, it describes certain bounties, etc., which you get in heaven. Parwez rereads that. He sees that, okay, no, these things don't happen in the afterlife, they happen now if we run things properly. Now this does not mean that Parwez rejects the afterlife. There's no overt statement to say that he does. But rather, he reinterprets the text to substantiate his conception of a heavenly existence. So why aren't human beings in this heavenly existence now? Well, Parwez says that the obstacle is selfishness. Back to that materialist conception again. Human beings, they have an unending hunger for wealth. Chapter 70, verse 19. They are exploited by the religious class. Chapter 9, verse 34. And they are always trying to shortchange one another. This is a very universal thing. We don't actually give that which we seek reward for. That's chapter 11, verse 84. So Parwez sees that when society is in this selfish state, it is somehow prevented from achieving that heavenly existence. So what is the antidote to this obstacle? Self-development. Again, it goes back to the nafs or the self. Investing in the development of the self. Chapter 64, verse 16. So, unless human beings invest in themselves, invest in their own development, it won't happen. And you don't see it very much in the world today. In the world today, you try to exploit the other person as much as possible. And you see it, we try to get third world countries to produce our stuff for us at horrible prices because we don't care about what happens to them, really. We only want the cheapest thing so that we can consume and consume. How can the self grow? According to the Quran, the self can only grow by giving out. So unless the self is trained to sacrifice, to give out, then it cannot evolve. So that's a bit of an irony there. You don't actually grow by consuming, you grow by sacrificing. And the self is the fulcrum of change. So this is another Quranic thing. So Parwez is actually deriving Quranic principles and trying to discover the means of achieving utopia. And the Quran says that the things will not change unless you yourself change. These are two very famous verses in the Quran. Chapter 13 verse 11 and chapter 8 verse 53. So in that perfect society, when you are developing yourself, what happens is you will see positive things start to happen in that society. Now here comes a bit of controversial stuff. Parwez also opposed the right of ownership. He quotes the devil who threatens us, Shaitan, threatens us with poverty in the Quran. So he believes that this threat makes us hoard wealth. So instead of hoarding wealth, we should give out wealth and share our property. So I can see that there is a certain influence which made him say that. But he used the personality of Qarun. Qarun is a personality during the time of Musa who thinks that the wealth is from himself. Chapter 28, verse 78. And when he thinks that, he has this selfish attitude and he does not care for social development. So Parwez believes that we should only have that which we strive for. So in that sense, owning a property according to him is not striving anymore. You already own it. So he believes that no, property should be the common rights of everyone. So how do we go about establishing this system? Well, Parwez calls it establishing Salat and Zakat. These are to him the twin pillars of the divine system, or Deen. Again, it might come as a surprise for those of you who don't know his thinking, but he sees Salat as diverting wealth towards the divine system. Chapter 11 verse 87, actually Shu'aib, the Prophet Shu'aib asked his people, his people asked the Prophet of Shu'aib, does your Salat require that we stop doing what we like with our property? So if you think of the word Salat in a traditional sense, it does not fit the context. So that's why Parwez believes that Salat is diverting wealth towards the divine system. Now this doesn't mean he didn't believe in the ritual. He did say that there is a ritualistic element to Salat, but he also believes that Salat is this. Zakat is providing means for sustenance. So it's not just giving charity, you have to provide means for sustenance. And he believes that when you have Salat and Zakat in your system, you are literally changing your system from a system of falsehood to a system of truth. But before you achieve that, Parwez has something which he calls the transitional